Captain Idris then had long since stopped worrying about the cosmic equivalent of safety regulations when it came to wormholes. After all, it wasn't like the universe had an interstellar highway code to enforce. He hunched over the cockpit controls of the Rust Bucket Supreme, a ship whose name spoke volumes about humanity's current budget constraints and the general state of affairs in space. "Everyone buckle up," he grunted over the intercom, his voice a gravelly testament to years of yelling at subordinates and the occasional space karaoke night. "We're about to meet our new alien overlords." The Thaljak were a species known for their love of long-winded decrees and a general superiority complex that could fill a solar system. Idris had volunteered for this mission out of a sheer masochistic curiosity, and the bonus pay, which he planned on squandering on cheap whiskey and expensive regrets. The ship shuddered as it approached the temple, an overly ambitious name for what looked like a metallic tumbleweed caught in a perpetual stellar breeze. Designed by beings who probably had an unhealthy obsession with fractals, the structure loomed ahead, a web of spindly towers and intricate lattices. "Well, ain't that a sight for sore eyes," said Zara, the ship's AI, who had a penchant for sarcasm and an attitude that made you question if she was one software update away from a mutiny. "Yeah, if your eyes are sore from staring at a garbage compactor," Idris replied, tapping a few buttons as the Rust Bucket Supreme's autopilot engaged. "I thought these Thaljak were supposed to be advanced. This looks like an alien teenager's art project gone wrong." "Maybe that's the point," chimed in Flynn, the ship's engineer, who was as mechanically inclined as he was socially awkward. "Make it look like junk so no one wants to steal it. Or go anywhere near it," Idris added. "Speaking of which, everyone knows the plan, right? Avoid pissing off the Thaljak. Don't mention the time you tried to flirt with their ambassador, and absolutely no sneezing," Flynn recited, checking off his fingers. "Nailed it," Idris said. "You know, it's a rare thing to find an engineer who not only fixes things but also pays attention." "I should put that on my CV," Flynn muttered, a ghost of a smile threatening his usually stoic face. The ship docked with a jarring clang that suggested one of the engineers behind the temple's design had a sense of humor. As the airlock hissed open, a gust of artificially freshened air that smelled suspiciously like burnt toast filled the cabin. "Welcome, human envoy," a voice echoed through the docking bay, its tone blending the warmth of a viper and the sincerity of a politician. "We are honored by your presence." In our own way, Idris stepped out, flanked by Flynn and Zara's holographic projection, which flickered as if undecided about participating in this farce. Their greeter was a Thaljak official named Churlak, who bore an uncanny resemblance to a walking stick insect with delusions of grandeur. "You know, I was half expecting a red carpet," Idris quipped, looking down at the cold metal floor. "Maybe a marching band." Churlak's multifaceted eyes narrowed in what Idris hoped was amusement. "We find such displays unnecessary. Besides, you're here for a different kind of ceremony, yes? Ah, yes, the main event, the big reveal. The reason Idris was here instead of enjoying a quiet drink on some distant rock." "Let's cut to the chase," he said. "You're banning human reproduction." "Care to explain the punchline?" Churlak clicked his mandibles thoughtfully, a sound like two pieces of styrofoam rubbing together. "Chaos," he said simply. "Your species breeds chaos." "Breeds? I thought we were pretty good at it without the need for adding more humans," Zara chimed in, her hologram deliberately crossing its arms. "But do go on." "This sounds like a conversation starter back home. Your kind introduces unpredictability," Churlak continued, ignoring Zara. "Our calculations show that within a century, unregulated human expansion will destabilize galactic order, hence the edict." Flynn raised an eyebrow. "Your calculations, huh? Did you use a dice for that, or do you have a chaos algorithm we can borrow for the next time we play poker?" "Our computations are infallible," Churlak stated, with all the confidence of a teenager who's just discovered the joys of internet discourse. Idris shook his head, trying to wrap his mind around the absurdity. So, what's the plan? You want us to just stop? Do you have any idea how difficult it is to keep humans from doing what they do best, making a mess of things? We have faith in your ingenuity, Charlak replied, diplomatic as ever. And if that fails, we have other measures. Wonderful, Zara said. The universe's first babysitter service with extinction-level consequences. We eagerly await your compliance, Charlak said, a hint of genuine glee creeping into his voice. Now, if you'll follow me, we can discuss the finer details in a more comfortable setting. The comfortable setting turned out to be a room that had all the charm of a dentist's waiting area, complete with chairs designed by someone who clearly hated backsides. Idris sat down gingerly, half expecting the seat to eject him into space. So, do you do this often? He asked, trying to break the ice that could have rivaled Jupiter's moons. Rarely, Charlak replied, taking a seat opposite. Most species understand the need for balance without intervention. And yet here we are, Flynn murmured, looking around for anything remotely entertaining, like a live grenade. Zara's hologram flickered again, leaning back in her own virtual chair. I don't know about you guys, but the idea of being a galactic scapegoat is really starting to grow on me. It's not like we've got a choice, Idris muttered, rubbing his temples. They've got us wedged tighter than a space peanut in an airlock. Charlak's antennae twitched, a gesture Idris guessed was either nervousness or mild indigestion. We do not wish conflict, the Thaljak assured. Merely cooperation. Yeah, tell that to the folks back home, Idris replied, thinking of the inevitable fallout. Explaining to billions that their baby-making days are over is gonna be a tough sell. Perhaps, Charlak mused, his voice dripping with the kind of patronizing empathy that made you want to throw a punch. But I'm sure you'll find a way to convey the necessity of our directive. How about a pamphlet? Flynn suggested, his voice deadpan. Something catchy like congratulations, you're now an endangered species. Idris chuckled, though he knew laughter was a poor shield against the inevitable chaos, not the kind the Thaljak feared, but the everyday variety humans excelled at. We'll need time, he finally said. To consider our options, Charlak nodded, rising with the grace of a marionette on strings. Take what you need. Just remember the universe is watching. As the Thaljak leader left them to stew in their newfound impotence, Idris exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Well, this is a fine mess we've gotten ourselves into, he said, looking at his crew. Suggestions? Flynn shrugged. We could always fake compliance, knock out a few Thaljak sentries and make a break for it. Ah yes, the classic go down in a blaze of glory routine, Zara replied, her hologram smirking. Still, it beats waiting around for extinction. Idris leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if it held the answers. Maybe there's a better way, something less suicidal. Flynn raised an eyebrow. Like what? I don't know, Idris admitted. But someone out there has to have an idea. We just need to find them before the Thaljak decide patience is no longer a virtue. Zara flickered, her image blurring before snapping back into focus. Well, Captain, she said, if anyone's crazy enough to pull a miracle out of this cosmic dumpster fire, it's us. Idris grinned, the kind of grin that promised trouble. Let's hope you're right, Zara. Otherwise, we're all about to become a footnote in a very long, very dull history book. And so they sat, a motley crew of humans and an AI, trapped in a cosmic farce of epic proportions, hoping against hope for a reprieve. Waiting for an idea, a solution, a miracle, or at the very least, a really good punchline. The temple's interior was as welcoming as a dentist's drill. Cold, utilitarian, and designed by someone who clearly despised comfort, the room Idris, Flynn, and Zara found themselves in was an extension of the Thaljak's personality. Aloof, indifferent, and slightly condescending. All right, team, Idris said, leaning against a wall that felt like a radiator in deep winter. We need to figure out why these Thaljak think they are the babysitters of the galaxy. You mean apart from their obvious superiority complex? Flynn asked, poking at a console that looked like it could vaporize a planet or make a decent cup of coffee, depending on which button was pressed. Zara's hologram, though slightly glitchy, managed an eye roll that was almost human. It's like they've never seen a species that doesn't conquer itself in its spare time. And who could blame them? Idris added. We've got a talent for screwing things up that's practically an art form. Just as Idris was about to dive deeper into this session of self-deprecating reflection, the door slid open with a whisper that suggested oil was in short supply this far out. In walked Tessa Quill, the ship's engineer in training, but more importantly, the ship's unofficial therapist and morale officer. "Ah, Tessa," Idris greeted, waving her in. "Just in time for the part where we figure out how to convince a race of cosmic know-it-alls that humanity isn't a universal hazard. Sounds like you've got it all under control," she replied, her voice laced with enough sarcasm to fuel a starship. "So what's the plan, Captain?" "Well, the Thaljak seem to think that our ability to reproduce equates to unleashing chaos on a cosmic scale," Idris explained, gesturing expansively. "Apparently the universe is one big preschool, and we're the kids who can't stop coloring outside the lines." Flynn added, "They've got some wild idea that if we keep multiplying, the whole galaxy will go to hell in a handbasket. They've conveniently ignored their own complicity in this mess." "Ah yes," Zara chimed in, "because nothing says advanced civilization like punishing the kids for playing in the dirt while ignoring the adults who built the sandbox on a fault line. Not to mention their temple looks like it was designed by a committee of blind architects," Tessa observed, taking a seat in one of the room's torture devices masquerading as chairs. "I mean, what's with all the fractals?" Idris shrugged. "Might be a cultural thing. Maybe they think it symbolizes balance or something. Or maybe they just really like geometric nightmares," Flynn said. As if on cue, the door slid open again, this time to admit Arlo Bren, the ship's linguist. The man had the demeanor of someone who'd rather be anywhere but here, discussing anything but this. "Have I missed the part where we solve the universe's problems?" Arlo asked, his voice tinged with dry wit. "Not yet," Idris said. "But stick around, we're just getting warmed up. Given what I've heard, it's a wonder the Thaljak haven't just locked us in a vault somewhere and thrown away the galaxy," Arlo mused. "Believe me, it crossed my mind to suggest it," Zara said. "But then I remembered I'd have to spend eternity with you lot, and I figured the universe deserved better." Churlak re-entered, his presence as jarring as a sudden power outage. "I trust you are discussing the matter at hand?" he asked, his tone implying he doubted they were. "Absolutely," Idris replied with a grin that could have melted lead. "We're just trying to wrap our heads around why you think humans are such a problem." Churlak's antennae twitched, a gesture that might have been a shrug. "Your history speaks for itself. Wars, environmental degradation, social instability. Unpredictability is your species' hallmark," Flynn snorted. "And what about your history? I bet you've got a few skeletons, or whatever you people have, in your closet," perhaps the Thaljak admitted. "But we are a species that learns from its mistakes. So are we," Tessa interjected. "It's just that our curriculum is more learn the hard way." Churlak studied them, his expression unreadable. "You misunderstand. We have no desire to dictate your internal affairs. Our concern is the impact your actions have beyond your own world. Then why not just let us sort it out on our own?" Arlo asked. "If we're truly that chaotic, surely we'll implode before becoming a real threat. Because our projections indicate otherwise," Churlak replied with a patience that suggested he was explaining basic math to toddlers. "Left unchecked, your expansion could disrupt the delicate equilibrium of galactic societies." "Oh, the old delicate equilibrium argument," Zara muttered. "Classic." Idris leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "What if we offered something in return?" he asked, more out of desperation than hope. "Some kind of compromise." Churlak considered this, his mandibles clicking softly. "What do you propose?" "Well, for starters, we could help with projects," Idris said lamely, clearly out of his depth in diplomacy. Lend a hand with some of those fractal designs. Maybe introduce you to some human chaos theory experts, Zara smirked. Or we could just give you a subscription to our reality TV. That should satisfy your need for chaos without lifting a single finger. Charlak's tone was that of a parent indulging a child's wild imagination. Your attempts at humor are noted. However, our decision remains firm. We require proof of your ability to manage your growth responsibly. Great, Flynn muttered under his breath. We're being lectured by a stick insect about responsible growth. Idris sighed, running a hand through his hair. All right. We'll come up with something. But you've got to give us time. That is acceptable, Charlak said. But remember, our patience is not infinite. With that, the Thaljak official left the room, leaving the humans to stew in their own existential crisis. Idris looked at his crew, a ragtag bunch of cynics and realists, none of whom had any illusions about the task ahead. All right, he said finally. Anyone got a plan that doesn't involve getting us all killed? Tessa scratched her chin. We could always pretend to comply. Keep them happy while we figure out a way to make them see reason. Fake it till we make it, Zara echoed. It's worked for politicians and pop stars for centuries. Or we could find some way to show them the upside of human unpredictability, Arlo suggested. Sure, we're chaotic, but we're also innovative. We can turn disaster into opportunity, Flynn nodded. Yeah, and if we can sell that idea, maybe we can buy ourselves some time. Idris pondered this, the pieces falling into place like a jigsaw with a few pieces chewed by a dog. All right then. Let's show them that chaos isn't all bad. We'll need to be convincing, though, and quick. Zara's hologram flickered as she grinned. Well, if there's one thing humans are good at, it's making a mess look like art. Idris chuckled, the sound more sardonic than joyful. Time to give the universe a crash course in human ingenuity then. Let's get to work. With a renewed, albeit precarious sense of purpose, the crew of the Rust Bucket Supreme set to the task of proving to an alien race that humanity's greatest flaw might just be its greatest asset. It wouldn't be easy and they might not succeed. But if they were going to go down, they'd make damn sure it was with a bang. Besides, Idris said as they left the room, what's the worst that could happen? Zara's hologram flickered beside him, her expression a mix of amusement and fatalism. Famous last words, Captain. The Rust Bucket Supreme's metallic hum was usually a comforting background noise, kind of like a lullaby sung by a drunk robot. But today, it sang a different tune, one that sounded suspiciously like a funeral march. As Idris, Flynn, Zara, Tessa, and Arlo shuffled out of the Thaljak's temple, they could all sense that something was off, like the quiet before a cataclysmic storm or the pause before a particularly bad joke. Why do I feel like we just poked a sleeping cosmic bear with a very short stick? Flynn quipped, fiddling with a piece of tech that looked more like a glorified paperweight than anything useful. Probably because we did, Idris replied, his voice a blend of sarcasm and exasperation. And now the bear is waking up. As if on cue, a low rumble vibrated through the temple's corridors, making the walls tremble with an ominous forewarning. The lights flickered, dimming momentarily before settling into a sinister glow that cast eerie shadows across the cold, utilitarian walls. Anyone else feel like we're in one of those haunted house vids? Tessa asked, her hands checking the straps of her tool belt out of nervous habit. Maybe it's just the temple's way of redecorating, Zara suggested. Setting the mood for imminent doom. It's working, Arlo muttered, his eyes darting around as if expecting the walls to sprout mouths and start singing about the end of days. The rumbling intensified, and the floor beneath them seemed to shift uneasily, like a giant beast stirring in its sleep. Idris's stomach dropped as the gravity went haywire, pulling them towards the ceiling, then the walls, like a toddler with a new toy who didn't quite understand the concept of fragile. Okay, not ideal, Idris grunted as he clutched the edge of a console to avoid becoming a temporary ceiling ornament. Suggestions: find the off button. Flynn suggested, his voice strained as he too clung to whatever was solid and stationary. Tessa, hanging onto a beam like a particularly determined monkey, squinted at the temple's console. I bet my last ration bar this is some kind of security measure. A safeguard against, well, us. Charming hospitality, Zara chimed in. Any chance we can convince it we're friendly guests? Depends, Tessa replied. Can you speak binary and have a way with overly paranoid AI? Zara's hologram flickered, her expression one of mock contemplation. I'm great with algorithms, but I left my charm circuits back on Earth. Arlo, who had been studying the console's fluctuating lights with growing concern, chimed in. This thing is reacting to something, but it's not us. At least, not directly. As if to underscore his point, a particularly violent tremor sent them all sprawling, the gravity shifting again with a malicious glee. Flynn managed a half-hearted laugh as he picked himself up. At this rate, they'll have to peel us off the walls. With a guttural groan, the temple seemed to right itself for a moment, giving them a brief reprieve from the zero-gravity chaos. Idris took a deep breath, which did little to calm his racing heart. We need to figure out what's got this place all riled up before it turns us into a modern art installation, or before the Thaljak decide we've overstayed our welcome, Tessa added, her tone dry as a desert. As if summoned by their collective dread, Charlak appeared, his entrance as noiseless as a thief in the night. Though his mandibles gave nothing away, his antennae betrayed his agitation. We are aware of the disturbance, he announced, his tone suggesting they were somehow to blame. Glad to know you didn't confuse the gravity anomaly with part of our negotiation tactics, Idris shot back, his voice dripping with irony. We prefer less kinetic methods. Charlak didn't blink, probably because his species didn't have eyelids, but his antennae twitched with something resembling irritation. The temple's systems are responding to an unidentified interference. Given your track record, I can understand the suspicion. Track record. Flynn echoed. What, you mean our famous ability to mess things up just by existing? Exactly, Charlak replied with a seriousness that dampened any humor Flynn had intended. We must ascertain whether this is an external threat or a byproduct of your presence. Byproduct. Tessa repeated in disbelief. What do you think we are, walking EMP? Charlak regarded her with an unreadable expression. Your species' unpredictability is well documented. It is not unreasonable to suspect you may have triggered this. Idris rubbed at his temples, feeling a headache blooming with all the subtlety of a supernova. Look, we're not exactly thrilled about being tossed around like cosmic pinballs either. But we're not stupid enough to sabotage ourselves. Debatable, Zara murmured, earning a withering look from Idris. As the argument teetered on the edge of a diplomatic disaster, Arlo held up a hand. Can we focus on fixing this before it gets worse? Blame and finger-pointing can wait until after we're not in danger of being turned into paste. Reluctantly, Charlak nodded. Agreed. But understand, any further escalation will not be tolerated. No pressure, Flynn muttered, rolling his eyes as he returned his attention to the console. Let's see if this thing can tell us what's got it so spooked. He tapped a few buttons with a careful precision that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else, preferably with a cold drink and less existential dread. The console's lights flickered in response, a sequence of colors and patterns that resembled a particularly bad acid trip. I think it's trying to communicate, Tessa said, peering over Flynn's shoulder. Not that I speak panicked temple AI, but it seems to be trying to tell us something. Maybe it's apologizing for the rough treatment, Zara quipped, though her hologram's eyes were focused intently on the readouts. Arlo, ever the linguist, leaned in to make sense of the garbled patterns. It's not a language I recognize, but it has structure. Could be a code or an alert. An alert for what? Idris asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. Something's interfering with its systems, Arlo replied, his brow furrowed. And it's not happy about it. Charlak's antennae twitched in a manner that suggested suspicion. And you are certain this interference is not of your doing, certain as I am that space is cold and unforgiving, Flynn answered, his tone conveying an edge of frustration. There's something else at play here. Then we must identify it, Charlac said, his voice now tinged with urgency. Before it escalates further, Idris nodded, though his mind raced with what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. The last thing they needed was for tensions to bubble over into hostility. They were supposed to be proving humanity's worth, not giving the Thaljak more reasons to view them as cosmic troublemakers. Let's split up, Idris suggested, though the thought of exploring more of the temple's labyrinthine corridors filled him with a distinct sense of dread. We need to find the source of this interference and shut it down before it decides to remodel the place with our bodies. The crew, minus Charlac, nodded in agreement, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. It was a look that said they'd been through worse and survived, though not without their share of scars, both visible and hidden. As they dispersed into the temple's cold, unfriendly corridors, Idris couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by eyes that saw more than they let on. The temple itself seemed alive, its architecture humming with a low electric tension that made his skin crawl. Just another day in the life of the Rust Bucket Supreme, he muttered under his breath, trying to summon a confidence he didn't truly feel. Find the problem, fix it, and try not to die in the process. Sounds like a plan, Zara's hologram replied, her voice a soothing balm to his frayed nerves. And if all else fails, we can always blame the Thaljak for overreacting. Blame game's a favorite across the universe, Flynn chimed in, his voice echoing from a nearby corridor. Let's just hope we don't end up as the punchline. With that, they plunged deeper into the temple's depths, driven by the need to solve the mystery and secure their precarious place in the galaxy. The stakes were high, and the odds were long, but if there was one thing Idris and his crew knew, it was how to turn chaos into opportunity. And if they failed, well, they'd go down fighting, proving to the Thaljak that humans were nothing if not stubbornly resilient, even in the face of overwhelming odds. After all, what was life without a little unpredictability? Captain Idris then found himself wondering, not for the first time, what he'd done in a past life to deserve this cosmic disaster of a day. Sure, he'd skipped a few safety briefings and had an enthusiastic disdain for both regulations and authority. But did that really warrant getting tossed around a temple like a rag doll in a zero-gravity circus? The corridors they navigated were more like a labyrinth designed by someone who hated straight lines and people in general. Every wall seemed to angle inwards like it was trying to give you a hug you didn't want. Idris could almost hear the temple whispering, "Welcome. Now please get lost." "Feels like we're inside a giant, angry puzzle box," Flynn observed, his tone as dry as ever. He fiddled with his piece of tech, a glorified paperweight if you asked Idris, like it might offer some arcane insight. "Yeah, one that's not thrilled about our presence," Tessa added, checking her tool belt again for comfort. She looked like a kid who'd lost her mom in a department store, trying to hide the panic behind a veneer of readiness. They turned a corner, and the lighting flickered ominously, casting long, jagged shadows that danced like manic marionettes. The temple groaned, a deep, resonant sound that set Idris's teeth on edge. It was the sound of metal straining under pressure, like the hull of a ship caught in a black hole's embrace. Or a stomach growling, Zara quipped from her hologram, her projected form infused with an annoying calmness. "Though I doubt it's hungry for anything we're serving. Speak for yourself," Idris retorted. "I'm a full-course meal, thank you very much." The levity was fleeting. They knew what was at stake. Somewhere deep within these metallic bowels was an ancient defense mechanism that was throwing a cosmic tantrum. Unchecked, it would either crush them into space dust or leave them floating through the temple like ghostly debris. They reached a junction where Arlo was hunched over a control panel. His fingers hovered above the interface, mumbling indecipherable equations under his breath like a mathematician at confession. The lights on the panel danced to a tune only they understood. "Hey, Arlo, making friends?" Flynn asked, sidling up next to him with all the grace of a cat approaching a suspiciously full food bowl. Arlo shrugged, a gesture that conveyed infinite tiredness. "If by friends you mean discovering that this temple has more issues than a paranoid android, then yes." Idris stepped forward, rubbing his temples, his own, not the cursed temples they were trapped in. "Okay, folks, we're looking for the core of this place. It's like finding a needle in a universe-sized haystack, but at least we don't have hay fever. And if we find it?" Tessa asked, her voice tinted with a hopeful skepticism that seemed to echo throughout the corridors. "Then we hit the big red button that says off, and hope it doesn't trigger a self-destruct sequence," Idris replied, deadpan. "We just need to get close enough to access it before it decides we're yesterday's news." Charlak chose that moment to reappear, antennae twitching like a lie detector on overdrive. "We have detected further escalations. The temple's gravitational field is destabilizing. If not contained, it could turn us into a fine mist." Flynn interjected, flashing a grin that was more grimace. "Precisely," Charlak answered, clearly missing the sarcasm. "Or maybe he just decided to ignore it, which was probably for the best." "Fantastic," Idris muttered. "All right, team, let's keep moving." "Charlak, any insights from your superior brain?" The alien cocked his head, considering. "There is a central node that regulates these systems. If we can stabilize it, the temple should cease its disruptive behavior." Translation: "Find the control room and play nice," Zara summarized, though her hologram flickered slightly, as if even it wasn't immune to the temple's antics. "Let's just hope this node isn't buried behind 1,000 years of alien bureaucracy," Idris said. "Or worse, technical manuals." With a shared look of resolute determination, or resigned doom depending on your viewpoint, they pressed onward into the heart of the temple. The air grew colder, and the lights dimmer, as if the structure itself was conserving energy for the grand finale. As they progressed, the hum of machinery grew louder, a symphony of gears and circuits that thrummed through their bones. It was a sound that promised both salvation and destruction, depending on how well they played their cards. Flynn glanced around, eyes peeled for anything that looked remotely like a control panel. "I'm starting to think we should have brought a map." "Maps are overrated," Tessa replied, though her grip on her tool belt suggested otherwise. "Besides, where's the fun in knowing where you're going? Survival isn't exactly a game I like to lose," Idris countered as they reached a wide chamber. It was filled with conduits and nodes, dozens of them, each pulsing with an alien energy that buzzed at the edge of comprehension. "Looks like we found the brain," Arlo announced, his voice echoing in the vast, cold space. "More like a migraine," Tessa added, scanning the array of lights and screens that blinked with an unsettling randomness. Idris approached the nearest console, its surface a mosaic of buttons and levers that seemed to defy all logic. "Okay, team. Time to demonstrate some human ingenuity. We need to stabilize this thing before it decides to rearrange the galaxy." "Human ingenuity," Flynn echoed. "I thought our whole SH stick was stumbling around until something works. Call it inspired trial and error," Idris suggested, poking at a few buttons which, thankfully, did not result in immediate catastrophe. Arlo examined another panel, his fingers flying over the surface as he deciphered the alien script. "These systems are ancient, but there's a logic to them. I think I can reroute the energy flow, but I'll need some time." "Time we might not have," Charlak interjected, his tone a blend of urgency and something that could almost be mistaken for concern. "The destabilization is accelerating." "Always a catch," Zara remarked, her hologram now flickering more insistently as the temple continued its tantrum. Idris rolled his eyes. "All right, Arlo, you and Flynn get working on that. Tessa, see if you can assist. Charlak, maybe you can help by not sabotaging us." Charlak tilted his head, acknowledging the jab with a twitch of his antennae. I will monitor the systems for any signs of external interference. Great, you do that, Idris said, turning his attention to the rest of his crew. Remember, folks, this isn't just about us. If we can stabilize the temple, we prove humanity can play nice with neighbors, even if they're cranky and think we smell funny. Flynn snorted as he connected a few cables, sparks flying but nothing catching fire for now. I doubt they care about our hygiene. Tessa, knee-deep in wires, laughed. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they just don't like us because we keep breaking their toys. Let's try not to break this one then, Idris instructed, though the odds of success felt slim. If we pull this off, it won't just be a win for us. We'll show them humans are more than chaos wrapped in meat suits. The team set to work, each member focused on their task. The room was filled with the sounds of hurried activity, punctuated by the occasional curse or exclamation of triumph. The stakes were high, the pressure immense, but if there was one thing Idris trusted, it was his crew's ability to rise to the occasion. As Arlo and Flynn worked to reroute power, Tessa adjusted the gravity stabilizers, her movements quick and precise. Charlak watched over them, an inscrutable guardian, his presence both comforting and unnerving. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling heavier than the last. The temple shuddered, an ominous warning that time was running out. It was a race against entropy, and they were barely holding on. Almost there, Arlo muttered, sweat beading on his brow as he finalized the rerouting sequence. Just a little more, Flynn added, his tone both hopeful and tense. Idris stood nearby, ready to lend a hand or offer encouragement. Come on, team. Show this place what humans are made of. With a final, decisive click, the system came online. The lights stabilized, the hum of machinery settling into a steady rhythm. For a moment, the temple was silent, as if considering their efforts. Then, with a reluctant sigh, the gravitational field stabilized. The tension in the air dissipated, replaced by a cautious calm that felt like a truce between old enemies. We did it, Tessa breathed, her relief palpable. Flynn let out a whoop of triumph, slapping Arlo on the back. Well, I'll be damned. We actually did it. Idris allowed himself a small smile, though the victory felt tenuous at best. All right, Charlak, tell your bosses that humanity just earned a few points on the galactic scoreboard. Charlak nodded, though his expression remained unreadable. This is a step in the right direction. However, there are those who remain skeptical of your species. There always are, Idris replied, his voice a mix of pride and resignation. But at least now they have something to think about. As they prepared to leave the chamber, the sense of accomplishment was tempered by the knowledge that their work wasn't done. Convincing the Thaljak of humanity's worth would take more than one victory, but it was a start. Let's head back to the Rust Bucket Supreme, Idris said, feeling the familiar pull of the ship he called home. We've got a report to file and a few choice words for the folks back on Earth. With a renewed sense of purpose, they retraced their steps through the temple, the corridors seeming less menacing now that the danger had passed. It was a small victory, but in a universe that often felt cold and indifferent, it was enough. As they boarded the ship, Idris turned to his crew, his voice filled with a warmth that belied his usual sarcasm. Nice work, everyone. We might be a ragtag bunch of misfits, but we're damn good at it. Flynn grinned, leaning back in his seat with a satisfied sigh. Here's to being underestimated. Tessa nodded, her expression one of weary gratitude. And to proving them wrong. With Charlak's silent approval, they prepared to leave the temple behind, their mission far from over but their spirits lifted. In the vastness of space, where danger lurked around every corner, they had found a moment of triumph, and that was something worth celebrating. The Rust Bucket Supreme vibrated beneath them like a cat that had swallowed a jackhammer, but the noise and motion were a welcome relief. The temple was behind them now, with its flickering lights and ancient tantrums. The only thing left was to file a report and pray someone back on Earth cared enough to read it. But this wasn't the moment for celebration. Not yet. Idris had learned the hard way that there's always one more disaster waiting around the corner, like an unwanted in-law. Flynn, how's that recalibration coming? Idris asked, his voice competing against the engine's growl. Flynn, already buried beneath a console, shot back, "Well, unless I suddenly develop a third arm, it's going to take a while. You could help, you know. Figured you could use the exercise," Idris retorted, smirking despite himself. It was the kind of banter that kept them sane, a thin veneer over the chaos beneath. Meanwhile, Tessa tinkered with her toolkit, a familiar ritual to stave off panic. She was a lot like the Rust Bucket Supreme, battered, dependable, and held together by sheer willpower. "So, Captain, any idea what we put in that report?" "Dear Earth, it's all gone to hell pretty much," Idris replied, rubbing the back of his neck, but with more diplomacy and less truth. Charlak stood nearby, antennae twitching like they'd been plugged into a live socket. "Your Earth authorities may not appreciate the brevity. Maybe not, but they'll appreciate the heads-up before the universe implodes," Flynn interjected, the usual sarcasm tinged with something sharper. "Assuming we don't implode first," Arlo muttered, his eyes darting around like a prey animal expecting a predator's pounce. "I don't trust this place, Captain. Feels like it's got plans. Idris gave a short laugh. "It's a temple, not a supervillain, same difference," Tessa said, trying to lighten the mood. "Both have a penchant for drama and bad lighting." Idris turned, ready to rally his troops with some rousing speech about human perseverance. Then the universe decided to remind him who was in charge. The ship lurched, sending them sprawling like drunks on a bender. Warnings blared through the cabin, a cacophony of doom. "Report," Idris barked, scrambling to his feet. "Gravity's gone haywire," Flynn shouted, gripping the console like it was the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. "Great. Just great." Idris punched a button on the command chair, glaring at the holographic display as if it personally wronged him. "We stabilize one hellhole and the next one lines up." Charlak's voice cut through the chaos, eerily calm. "The temple's systems are reacting to an unseen disturbance." "Unseen disturbance?" Idris echoed, incredulous. "You mean there's a ghost in the machine?" "More like a poltergeist," Flynn muttered, his fingers flying across the controls. The ship bucked again, and Tessa's toolkit clattered to the floor, scattering tools like a bizarre confetti. "This is bad, Idris," she said, her voice trembling around the edges. "We need to stabilize or we're toast." "Then stabilize it." Idris snapped, frustration and fear doing a nasty tango in his gut. "Trying." Flynn spat, his own patience wearing thin as the situation escalated. "But this tech is more finicky than a cat with a hangover." The Rust Bucket Supreme shuddered violently, and Arlo lost his footing, sliding toward a console like a rag doll. His head connected with a sickening thud, leaving him sprawled and unmoving. "Arlo!" Tessa cried, scrambling toward him, her voice a raw edge of panic. Idris's heart dropped to his boots as he staggered to Arlo's side. "Hell," he breathed, checking for a pulse that was conspicuously absent. "Damn it, Arlo, you stubborn." The words died in his throat, swallowed by a grief he didn't have time to process. "Tessa, can you?" Tessa shook her head, her hands trembling as she confirmed what they both already knew. "He's gone," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Just gone." Flynn's expression tightened, the loss cutting through the tension like a knife. "We'll mourn him later," he said, the words gruff around the edges but laced with conviction. "Right now, we need to make sure the rest of us don't join him." Idris nodded, though every instinct screamed to stop, to grieve, to rage against the unfairness of it all. But he was a captain, and his crew needed him. "Charlak, get on those sensors," Idris ordered, his voice a brittle shell of authority. "Flynn, Tessa, find a way to stabilize the damn ship." With a nod, Tessa returned to her console, her grief tucked away for later. Flynn was already hard at work, his focus a razor's edge of determination. Charlak moved to another console, his antennae flicking with grim efficiency. "I'm detecting fluctuations in the temple's field. It seems to be attempting to recalibrate. Whatever it's doing, it's killing us," Idris growled. "Find a way to stop it." The ship twisted again, a sickening lurch that sent Idris to his knees. For a moment he lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was how it ended, crushed under the invisible hand of some ancient architecture's temper tantrum. But then Tessa's voice rang out, a lifeline in the storm. Got it. Rerouting power to the stabilizers. About time we caught a break, Flynn murmured, though his relief was tempered with the knowledge of what they'd lost. The ship settled, the chaos subsiding to a low simmer. For the first time since they'd left the temple, Idris allowed himself a breath that wasn't laced with impending catastrophe. Good work, he said, though the words felt hollow. Charlak turned, his expression unreadable. This is a temporary reprieve. The temple's systems are unpredictable. We may face another escalation. Yeah, well, I'll take temporary over terminal any day, Idris replied, his voice rough with exhaustion and loss. We'll figure out the rest as it comes. With a nod, Charlak returned to his console, his focus undeterred by the drama unfolding around him. Flynn and Tessa continued their work, their movements a dance of quiet efficiency. Idris glanced at Arlo's still form, a pang of regret twisting his insides. He'd been a good man, a loyal friend, and he deserved better than this. We'll give you a proper send-off when we get back, Idris murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the engines. I promise. But promises were fragile things, easily shattered by the whims of fate. And in the cold, uncaring void of space, there were no guarantees. As the Rust Bucket Supreme forged ahead, Idris resolved to keep his crew alive, to ensure Arlo's sacrifice wasn't in vain. It was a small comfort, a flicker of hope in the darkness, but for now it was all they had. The temple might throw more at them, and the galaxy might still see humanity as a cosmic joke. But they were still here, still fighting, and that was enough to keep them going. The Rust Bucket Supreme was floating in space like a drunk uncle at a wedding, spinning ever so slightly off-kilter. The crew was gathered in the control room, a peculiar mix of anxiety and resignation clinging to them like a bad rash. Idris Venn, their fearless, or perhaps just reckless, captain, was pacing back and forth, his boots tapping out a rhythm that matched the ship's grumbling engines. Arlo was dead, a stark reminder that space wasn't just a final frontier, but a final everything if you weren't careful. Idris had shoved that grief into a dark corner of his mind to be dealt with later. Much later. Right now they had a bigger problem. Like planet-sized. All right, team, we need to figure out what the hell is going on with this temple. Idris started, scratching his head as if that might somehow dislodge a brilliant idea. It didn't. Flynn, got anything that might help? A magic wand, maybe. Flynn was half buried inside a console, only his legs visible. The rest of his body seemed to be engaged in an intimate wrestling match with some wires. Sure, Captain. Let me just pull a miracle out of my, save it, Idris cut him off. I need solutions, not sarcasm. Why not both? Flynn grumbled, reappearing with a smudge of grease across his cheek that looked like a tiny Rorschach test of doom. Anyway, the only thing I've figured out is that this temple's systems are older than your sense of humor and twice as likely to kill us. Tessa, ever the pragmatic one, glanced up from the array of gadgets spread out like a mad scientist's buffet. I've been going over Arlo's notes. Before, you know, he became one with the console. He'd been trying to decipher some of the ancient texts we found. Idris raised an eyebrow. And then he did it, she said, a hint of awe in her voice. Turns out, those texts suggest that humans are somehow key to the temple's balance. Humans? You mean us? Flynn laughed, a sharp, disbelieving bark. We're barely balanced enough to keep from killing ourselves, let alone balance a whole temple. Charlak, their resident alien and voice of reason, flicked his antennae thoughtfully. It is possible that the creators of the temple foresaw a need for human interaction. Perhaps our chaotic nature is a stabilizing force. Chaotic. Idris repeated, a smirk tugging at his lips. That's a polite way to put it. Politeness was not my intention, Charlak replied, his antennae twitching in what might have been amusement. Idris sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. So, let me get this straight. We're supposed to somehow balance this ancient temple by being ourselves. Pretty much, Tessa said, shrugging. And if that doesn't work, we can always try sacrificing Flynn. Hey. Flynn shot back, brandishing a wrench like it was a weapon. "I'm not volunteering for ritual murder, thank you very much." Before Idris could come up with a suitably sarcastic retort, the ship's comm system crackled to life, a harsh rasp that could only mean one thing: Thaljak, their self-appointed galactic babysitters. "This is High Curator Estral of the Thaljak," came the voice, as smooth and cold as a glacier. "We have detected disturbances originating from the temple." "Explain." Idris rolled his eyes and hit the comms, adopting a tone that was just diplomatic enough to avoid outright war. "High Curator, lovely to hear from you. We were just working on it. Your presence is destabilizing a sacred site. You must leave immediately." "Can't do that," Idris replied, forcing a smile into his voice. "Turns out we're somewhat crucial to this whole balance malarkey." There was a pause, as if the curator was digesting this unexpected piece of information. "Explain further." Tessa jumped in, her voice calm and rational. "The ancient texts suggest a connection between human presence and the temple's equilibrium. We believe removing us might cause more harm than good." The silence stretched, oppressive and full of judgment. Idris could practically hear the gears turning in the Thaljak's collective mind. Finally, the curator spoke again. "Your claims are unexpected. We will dispatch a faction to investigate these findings. Until then, you will remain under observation." "Guess we're making friends," Flynn quipped, shutting off the comms with a flourish. Nothing like a little interstellar scrutiny to spice things up. Idris folded his arms, studying his crew. "All right, folks, looks like we've got ourselves a little diplomatic mission. We need to convince the Thaljak that tossing us out on our asses isn't in anyone's best interest." Tessa nodded. "And we need to figure out how to make this balance thing work. Or at least fake it till we make it," Flynn added, earning him a pointed look from Idris. As they got to work, the Rust Bucket Supreme hummed with activity, the crew tackling their tasks with the grim determination of people who had run out of other options. Charlak, meanwhile, was focused on the temple's data, antennae twitching as he processed the information. "I suggest we attempt to communicate with the temple's systems directly," he said, more to himself than anyone else. "Communicate?" Idris asked, glancing over. "You think it speaks English? Unlikely," Charlak admitted. "But if it recognizes human presence as a stabilizing factor, perhaps we can access a control interface." Flynn leaned back, stretching until his joints popped. "I suppose it's worth a shot. Beats sitting around waiting for the Thaljak to decide we're expendable." With Charlak's guidance, they began to work on establishing a link with the temple, their efforts a testament to human stubbornness. As the minutes turned into hours, the ship was filled with a tense silence, punctuated only by the occasional curse from Flynn whenever something didn't go according to plan, which was often. Finally, as the ship's lights flickered and dimmed, Charlak's console emitted a soft chime. "I believe we have access," he announced, a note of triumph in his voice. Tessa peered over his shoulder, eyes wide. "What now?" "Now," Charlak said, "we attempt to stabilize the systems. It appears there are controls for adjusting various parameters, perhaps even the gravitational fields." "Sounds easy enough," Flynn muttered, taking his place at the console. "Just gotta avoid turning us into space pancakes." Idris nodded, watching as his crew worked with the kind of focus that only came from knowing your life depended on it. He couldn't help but feel a surge of pride despite the circumstances. They weren't perfect, far from it, but they were his crew, and they were damn good at what they did. As Flynn and Charlak adjusted the settings, the ship shuddered, the vibrations easing as the temple's systems began to respond. "It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Looks like we've put a band-aid on the bullet wound," Flynn said, stepping back from the console with a satisfied grin. "Good work," Idris replied, clapping him on the shoulder. "Now let's hope it's enough to keep the Thaljak from deciding we're better off as space debris." As if summoned by the thought, the comms crackled to life once more, the High Curator's voice filling the cabin. "We are en route to your position. Prepare for docking. Looks like playtime's over," Tessa commented, leaning back in her chair. Idris nodded, steeling himself for the inevitable diplomatic dance. All right, crew. Let's show them what humans can do. The Rust Bucket Supreme might have been a rattling heap of metal, and they might have been led by a captain who had a bad habit of tempting fate, but they had something the Thaljak lacked: hope, determination, and just enough madness to pull off the impossible. The Thaljak ship docked with the Rust Bucket Supreme with all the grace and subtlety of a brick through a window. Idris and his crew stood waiting as the airlock hissed open, revealing a small delegation of Thaljak, their expressions as inscrutable as ever. High Curator Estral led the group, his presence as imposing as a storm cloud. He regarded Idris with the kind of look usually reserved for something unpleasant discovered under a boot. "Captain Ven," Estral began, his voice a glacier's whisper, "we are here to assess your claims, of course," Idris replied, offering a smile that had all the warmth of a space heater on the fritz. "Welcome aboard the Rust Bucket Supreme. Please, try not to judge us by the decor." Estral's antennae twitched, his gaze sweeping over the cramped interior. "We will require access to your data and findings. Right this way," Idris gestured, leading the way as the Thaljak delegation followed. Their footsteps echoed through the ship, a constant reminder that their fate now rested on the tenuous hope of an alliance. Once in the control room, Charlak took the lead, explaining their findings with the kind of calm precision that Idris admired, even if he didn't always understand half of what was being said. The High Curator listened, his expression unchanging. Finally, as Charlak concluded his explanation, Estral spoke. "Your findings are intriguing. It is possible that our understanding of the temple's systems is incomplete. That's a fancy way of saying we might be right," Flynn muttered under his breath, earning him a sharp elbow from Tessa. Estral turned his gaze to Idris, those alien eyes probing, searching. "Should your claims prove correct, the implications would be significant. The Thaljak do not easily welcome change. The universe is full of surprises," Idris replied with a shrug. "We've learned to roll with them." "Indeed," Estral said, his tone contemplative. "We will conduct our own investigations. In the meantime, you will remain under our watch." Idris nodded, the weight of the situation settling over him like a suffocating blanket. "We appreciate the opportunity." As the Thaljak delegation departed, the airlock closing behind them with an ominous clang, Idris let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Well, that went about as well as a root canal," Flynn snorted. "At least they didn't decide to space us." "Yet, small victories," Tessa agreed. Charlak, ever the optimist, or as close to one as their crew got, flicked his antennae in a gesture of confidence. "There is potential here for a new understanding." Idris hoped he was right. They'd gambled everything on a hunch and a prayer, trusting that their chaotic human nature might just be the key to saving them all. And in the vast, uncaring expanse of space, sometimes a little faith was all you had. The Rust Bucket Supreme rattled in an unsettling way, like a coffin with a fresh inhabitant. But that was par for the course. The ship always seemed one loose screw away from completely unraveling, much like its crew. Captain Idris Ven leaned back in his chair, the leather groaning under the pressure, as he considered the latest wrinkle in their ongoing cosmic melodrama. "All right, folks," Idris announced, trying to inject some cheer into his voice. "We've got the Thaljak breathing down our necks, an ancient temple that might decide to boot us into the void, and a ship that flies like a drunk trying to balance on a unicycle. What's the plan?" Flynn, fiddling angrily with the console, shot him a look that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "If I knew that, I wouldn't be stuck on this tin can with you lot, would I? That's the spirit." Idris clapped Flynn on the shoulder. "Now, how do we stabilize the temple before the Thaljak decide to demote us from nuisance to target practice?" Tessa Quill, somewhere between ship's engineer in training and unofficial crew counselor, rolled her eyes. Charlak suggested something about interfacing with the temple's systems. "Turns out he might be onto something." Charlak, the ever-diligent alien presence, was busy at a console, antennae twitching like they had a mind of their own. Indeed, the temple systems are responsive to certain signals. It is possible we could synchronize our technology with theirs, achieving a balance. Fantastic, Idris said, rubbing his hands together. So how do we do that without blowing ourselves to kingdom come? Carefully, Charlak replied, the word hanging in the air like the punchline to a bad joke. We should start by analyzing the temple's data, Tessa suggested. Already pulling up screens of information that looked like an Escher painting had a love child with a calculus textbook. Then we can figure out how our systems can complement theirs. Complement? Flynn echoed. Our systems can barely complement each other. It's like trying to make a symphony out of car alarms and chainsaws. Idris chuckled. Welcome to the Rust Bucket Supreme, where miracles happen or we're all toast. Tessa was already elbow-deep in wires and circuits, occasionally letting out a curse that would make a sailor blush. If we're going to do this, we need to act fast. The temple's systems are ancient and temperamental, much like its creators. And much like our captain, Flynn said with a grin. Hey, I resemble that remark, Idris shot back. For a moment, the crew fell into a focused silence, each of them working as if their lives depended on it, because, well, they did. The temple was a fickle beast, its systems as stable as a politician's promises. Okay, Tessa said finally, her voice cutting through the low hum of machinery, we need to transmit a synchronization pulse. If we get the frequency right, it should align our systems with theirs. And if we get it wrong, Idris asked. Flynn shrugged. Either nothing happens or we become the galaxy's newest asteroid belt. Always an optimist, Flynn, Tessa said, shaking her head. Idris nodded, feeling the weight of leadership pressing down on him like an overeager hug. All right, let's do this. Everyone to your stations, and let's hope we don't end up as space dust. Charlak initiated the sequence, his antennae a blur of motion. The ship's systems hummed, lights flickering as if in tune with some cosmic symphony only they could hear. Here goes nothing, Flynn muttered, fingers dancing across the console as if trying to coax it into cooperation. The ship vibrated, a low, steady rumble that set teeth on edge. Idris gripped the armrests of his chair, knuckles white. Steady as she goes, people. Tessa monitored the readouts, her expression a mix of concentration and quiet desperation. Come on, you cranky old machine, work with us. The ship shuddered again, the vibrations reaching a crescendo before suddenly stilling, the silence almost as unsettling as the noise had been. Did it work? Idris asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Flynn stared at the console, brow furrowed. I think it did. The temple's systems are stabilizing, gravity's normalizing, and the lights have stopped their disco impression. Charlak confirmed it with a nod. The synchronization appears to have succeeded. The temple is no longer registering us as a threat. A collective sigh of relief swept through the crew, the tension that had gripped them slowly releasing its hold. Even Idris felt a flicker of hope, an emotion he'd almost forgotten existed. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. We actually pulled it off. Don't jinx it, Tessa warned, though the smile on her face belied her words. The ship's comm system crackled, the familiar cold tones of High Curator Estral filling the cabin. Captain Venn, we have observed your efforts. It seems your claims hold merit. Glad you approve, Idris replied, trying to keep the smugness out of his voice. We aim to please, or at least not destroy everything we touch. Estral's voice remained as emotionless as ever. Your actions have demonstrated a capacity for adaptability. The Council has decided to lift the reproduction ban placed on humanity. Flynn snorted. So we can go forth and multiply without their cosmic oversight. How generous. You are still under observation, Estral added, his tone a reminder that freedom was always conditional. But your ingenuity has not gone unnoticed. The Thaljak will continue to monitor your progress. Wouldn't have it any other way, Idris replied, smirking. As the comms went silent, Idris turned to his crew, pride swelling in his chest. We did it, folks. We proved there's more to humanity than chaos and confusion. More like we proved chaos and confusion have their uses, Flynn corrected, stretching his arms above his head. But yeah, I guess we did all right. Tessa chuckled, shaking her head. Only us. Only this crew could pull something like this off. Churlak, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, offered a rare smile. It seems humans have a talent for finding harmony in the midst of disorder, and for making friends in the unlikeliest of places, Idris added, thinking of the Thaljak and their begrudging acknowledgement. The Rust Bucket Supreme might not have been the sleekest ship, and its crew might not have been the galaxy's finest, but they were a force to be reckoned with, a testament to humanity's stubborn refusal to give up, even in the face of overwhelming odds. "So what's next?" Tessa asked, looking at Idris with a mix of anticipation and wariness. Idris leaned back, a slow grin spreading across his face. "Next, we see what other trouble we can stir up in this vast, indifferent universe." Flynn groaned. "More trouble? Can't we just enjoy not being on the brink of annihilation for 5 minutes? Where's the fun in that?" Idris shot back, the familiar banter a bomb after the nerve-wracking tension of their recent exploits. The crew laughed, the sound a rare moment of genuine camaraderie that warmed the cold confines of their ship. For now, they had earned a respite, a brief pause in the relentless march of chaos that was their lives. As the Rust Bucket Supreme settled into a new, steady rhythm, Idris allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they'd finally caught a break. At least until the next crisis decided to rear its ugly head. But until then, they'd savor their victory, however small, and face whatever came next with the same irreverent determination that had carried them this far. After all, they were the crew of the Rust Bucket Supreme, and if anyone could find order in the chaos, it was them. The Rust Bucket Supreme drifted in the vastness of space like a cart on its last wheel, held together by duct tape and a prayer. Captain Idris then leaned back, surveying the aftermath of their latest escapade. It wasn't every day you outsmarted ancient tech and got a pat on the back from your cosmic overlords. He allowed himself a smirk, the kind of smile that suggests you've just bluffed your way out of certain death. Again. "All right, team," Idris announced, stretching his arms and hearing that satisfying pop in his shoulder. "We've officially stopped the temple from treating us like a cosmic bug zapper. I say that's cause for celebration." Flynn, perennially glued to the console, snorted. "What's there to celebrate? That we're not dead. If that's our metric for success, maybe we should raise the bar a tad. Given our track record, not being dead is a minor miracle," Tessa chimed in, still fiddling with a mess of wires as if they held all the secrets of the universe. "Let's not tempt fate." Churlak watched them with an expression that might have been amusement, antennae twitching ever so slightly. "It is fascinating how humans find humor in precarious situations. It's a survival trait," Idris said with a wink. "You either laugh or you cry. I prefer to laugh. Less cleanup. And we're not completely out of the woods yet," Flynn added, tapping a few keys to ensure the temple wasn't about to pull any cosmic pranks. "We still have to figure out how to leave without pissing off the Thaljak or the temple deciding it wants a second round." Idris rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Right you are, Flynn. But let's take a moment to savor this rare victory. We've managed to convince the Thaljak that humans are more than just chaos incarnate, which is ironic, given that chaos is our specialty," Tessa remarked dryly, still focused on the tech guts sprawled before her. "Speaking of chaos, the temple's gravity seems to be doing something new," Churlak observed, pointing a finger-like appendage at the viewport. The crew turned to see the space outside shimmer with a kind of kaleidoscopic beauty that made them all pause. It was as if the universe had taken a deep breath and decided to paint something worth noticing for once. The temple, in all its ancient capriciousness, was forming a wormhole. "Well, that's either the universe's way of offering us a way out or it's about to swallow us whole," Flynn said, squinting at the display. "Glass half empty much." Tessa grinned, nudging Flynn's shoulder. "It might be a stable wormhole. The temple's system seemed to have synchronized with Ior's. Remember, stable wormhole is an oxymoron if I ever heard one, Idris muttered. But at this point I'll take what I can get. Charlak, any insights? Charlak pondered for a moment, antennae twitching thoughtfully. The temple is indeed offering a means of travel. It seems the synchronization has forged a pathway, a symbol of potential unity between our species, or a convenient exit so it doesn't have to deal with us anymore, Flynn suggested, half serious. Idris chuckled, waving Flynn's cynicism away. Unity, escape, call it what you want. If it gets us out of here intact, I'm all for it. Let's prep for jump. You're just full of optimism today, aren't you, Captain? Flynn quipped, but he was already keying in the necessary commands to align the ship for the wormhole. As they prepared, a rare moment of quiet settled over the crew. It was the kind of calm that follows chaos, a fragile piece held together by the knowledge they hadn't been blown to bits yet. Hey, maybe this is a sign, Tessa ventured, her voice just above a whisper. Maybe things are finally turning around for us. Idris raised an eyebrow. You suggesting we've turned a corner, MS? Quill, she shrugged. All I'm saying is we managed to convince a bunch of self-important aliens not to vaporize us, and a temple thousands of years old to play nice. That's got to count for something. Maybe we're just the right kind of crazy, Flynn said, grinning despite himself. Just enough to pull it off. I'll drink to that, Idris agreed, though in truth, he'd drink to just about anything at this point. With the ship aligned and the wormhole shimmering like a beckoning promise, Idris took a deep breath. All right, folks, let's see if this wormhole is a one-way trip to a new adventure or to our untimely demise. Such motivation, Charlak observed, though the corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. Gotta keep expectations low, Flynn said, fingers dancing over the console. That way you're never disappointed, or you're always pleasantly surprised, Tessa added, watching the data streams flicker on her console with cautious optimism. Or you're dead, Idris noted, smirking. But hey, that's just semantics. With a final nod of readiness, Idris gave Flynn the go-ahead. The ship lurched forward, pulled inexorably toward the swirling anomaly. The rust bucket supreme, for all its tendency to rattle and groan, held together, inching toward the unknown with a kind of reluctant dignity. As they entered the wormhole, space twisted and warped around them in a way that made Idris's stomach do somersaults. It was like being on the galaxy's worst amusement park ride, and he'd never been one for roller coasters. But then again, life aboard the rust bucket was a perpetual ride of its own, sometimes thrilling, often terrifying, always unpredictable. Hold on, folks, Idris warned, gripping the armrests of his chair. This could get interesting. Flynn echoed, incredulous. That's one way to put it. The ship shuddered slightly, as if protesting this new kind of travel, but then stillness. They were through. Well, that was anticlimactic, Tessa said, glancing around. We're not dead. I call that a success. Don't celebrate just yet, Flynn cautioned, scanning the displays. We might have just jumped into an entirely different mess. Idris leaned forward, peering through the viewport at the new starscape. It was familiar yet different, an endless sea of stars undisturbed by the chaos they'd left behind. Wherever we are, it's got to be better than back there, or at least less likely to kill us outright, Flynn muttered, though there was a touch of relief in his voice. The comm system crackled to life, cutting into their musings. Captain Venn, High Curator Estrel's voice echoed through the cabin, still as emotionless as ever. The Council acknowledges your successful transition through the Temple's wormhole. You have demonstrated capabilities that warrant continued observation and potentially collaboration. Idris grinned, feeling a rare sense of satisfaction. I'll take that as a compliment, High Curator. Do not grow complacent, Captain. The galaxy is ever-changing, and so too must its inhabitants be. Words of wisdom, Estrel, Flynn quipped, unable to resist a jab. We'll keep that in mind while we're trying not to die out here. Estrel ignored the jab, continuing with the same infuriating calm. The Council will monitor your progress. Do not disappoint us. Wouldn't dream of it, Idris replied, the sarcasm barely veiled. Thanks for the vote of confidence. As the comms went silent, Idris leaned back, feeling the weight of the universe lift ever so slightly from his shoulders. For once they'd managed to come out ahead. It might not last, but hell, it was something. So, Captain, Tessa said, leaning against the console, what now? Idris considered the vast expanse before them, possibilities stretching out like the stars themselves. Now we keep doing what we do best. Stirring up trouble, exploring the unexplored, and maybe, just maybe, making a difference. Flynn snorted. Making a difference, huh? Since when did we become the galaxy's poster children for change? Since we stopped a temple from blowing us to stardust and got the Thaljak to lift their ban on humanity, Idris replied, crossing his arms. I'd say that counts for something. Agreed, Charlak said, his tone almost warm. Your species continues to surprise, and that is not a quality to be undervalued. Look at us, getting praise from our resident alien, Flynn said, grinning. We must be doing something right, or we're just very, very lucky, Tessa added, her smile mirroring Flynn's. Either way, I'll take it. The crew of the Rust Bucket Supreme, each in their own way, allowed themselves a moment of hope. They were on a path none of them could have predicted, with allies they never expected, and futures that seemed for the first time a little less grim. And Flynn, Idris said, a mischievous glint in his eye. Yeah, Captain, set a course for wherever looks least likely to explode. I'd like to keep this ship in one piece for a while longer, Flynn laughed, hands flying over the console. Aye, Captain. Least likely to explode, coming right up. As the Rust Bucket Supreme eased into its new course, Idris glanced around at his crew. They were an odd bunch, thrown together by circumstance and bound by shared absurdity. But they were his. For better or worse, they'd face whatever the universe had in store, with wits sharp and sarcasm sharper. And as they sailed into the unknown, the stars seemed to twinkle in approval.